But what comes after, the mask falls away. What comes after, the night of reckoning when the mirrors of ambition and identity no longer reflect anything solid. This is the moment modern culture doesn't prepare us for. Productivity manuals go silent. Social media inspiration feels hollow. And the old answers don't soothe the new ache. You're left with a strange fatigue, a spiritual exhaustion, and a haunting sensation that nothing matters, and yet everything matters differently now. And this is where Jung's wisdom becomes a lifeline. He taught that the ego must not be destroyed but integrated, that our task is not to return to who we were before, but to uncover the self, the hidden architect of the soul, buried beneath years of conditioning and unconscious scripting. He wrote, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know. He speaks to us in dreams. And it is this unknown self, the one that speaks through symbols, urges, and strange synchronicities, that must now become our guide." When the persona collapses the mask you've worn your entire life, the story you've rehearsed for family, for lovers, for your own reflection, the result is not always a glorious rebirth. More often, it is stillness, a strange, disorienting pause. You wake up one morning and the hunger that used to drive you, the need to win, to impress, to chase, has disappeared. What remains is not depression, not yet apathy, but something more peculiar, the psychological void. Carl Jung, who spent his life mapping the depths of the unconscious, spoke often of this transitional space. He understood that ego death is not a single event, but a threshold, a liminal chamber between who you were and who you are becoming. And within this space, many modern seekers lose their way, not because they've failed, but because no one taught them how to wait. You see, in our culture, stillness is mistaken for failure. Quiet is confused with laziness. The absence of ambition is treated as pathology. So when you hit the void, when you no longer feel driven by the same goals, when old dreams feel like costumes that no longer fit, your first instinct may be to panic, to question yourself, to try and stitch your old life back together. But Jung would urge the opposite: do not flee the silence. Enter it. He wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." This is the threshold of awakening. And like any threshold, it begins with disorientation. You may feel heavy, exhausted, purposeless. But these are not signs that you're broken. These are signs that you're shedding. The identity that once organized your thoughts, your schedule, your relationships, it's gone. And now, your psyche is recalibrating. Not because you're lazy, but because you're being invited into something deeper than the performance of life. You are being called into the authentic experience of being. At this stage, your instinct may be to fix the emptiness, to reach for affirmations, productivity hacks, vision boards. But those tools effective in the past may now feel brittle, forced, disconnected. That's because they were designed for the ego. They functioned to help you maintain the old structure. But now, with the ego dissolved or destabilized, those same tools ring hollow. Instead of resisting the emptiness, Jung invites you to befriend it. Ask yourself, what if this isn't a block? What if this is an opening? What if your lack of drive isn't a dysfunction, but a pause from the self, asking you to stop forcing and start listening? Because beneath the void is the voice, not the loud barking voice of the inner critic or the performative ego, but a quieter hum, an intuitive pull. And that voice belongs to what Jung called the self, with a capital S. It is the totality of your being, your conscious thoughts, your unconscious memories, your shadow, your archetypes, your dreams. It is not your resume. It is not your personality test. It is the soul blueprint beneath all your adaptations. But the self does not shout. It does not demand. It whispers. It nudges. It speaks in symbols, synchronicities, and strange urges that defy logic but feel oddly true. Imagine this. You've been sitting in your room for days, staring at a blank wall. Nothing excites you. You scroll, you sleep, you ache. And then out of nowhere, you feel a sudden desire to rearrange the furniture. It makes no sense, but it feels light, playful, even sacred. That's the self stirring. That's the unconscious sending a message, not in words, but in movement. Jung called this process individuation, the unfolding of the self through integration. It is not a straight line. It does not follow a calendar. It is a spiral path inward, one that demands curiosity more than control. Here's what no one tells you: the void is fertile. It is from this space of silence that new desires emerge. Desires not rooted in status or survival, but in soul alignment. You may feel called to write something not because it will go viral, but because it aches to be said. You may want to change your diet not because of shame, but because your body wants to feel alive. You may crave solitude not out of social anxiety, but because your spirit is teaching you how to listen. But none of this can begin if you override the void, if you rush back to busy, if you shame yourself for not being motivated. Because the self does not respond to pressure. It responds to presence. So here's your task if you are in this place right now. Don't fix the silence. Feel it. Don't chase the old fire. Watch for the new spark. Don't demand answers. Follow the questions. Jung knew that this phase was not for the faint of heart, that most would retreat, that many would reattach to old identities simply to feel certain again. But those who remain, those who trust the slow, sacred recalibration, begin to move differently. They create not from ego, but from essence. They live not to impress, but to express. They become not perfect, but whole. So if you are drifting in the void, you are not lost. You are gestating, and something deeper, something true, is quietly preparing to emerge. If part 1 showed us that the void after ego death is not absence, but preparation, then we must now confront a far more subtle trap, the illusion of resistance disguised as rest. You see, many people think they are resting when they are in fact wrestling. You may lie in bed still and quiet on the outside, but inside your thoughts are pacing, criticizing, shaming. Why am I like this? Why can't I just get up and do something? What's wrong with me? This, my friend, is not rest. It is inner warfare. And Jung would say, this is precisely where your energy is leaking. True rest regenerates the psyche. But internal conflict, this tension between what you feel and what you think you should feel, drains your vitality. It fractures your wholeness. It splits the psyche. Carl Jung knew this inner division intimately. He called it psychic splitting, when one part of the psyche is disowned or denied by another, leading to a break in energy, purpose, and peace. He taught that whenever we repress or judge a part of ourselves, be it sadness, laziness, anger, or confusion, it doesn't vanish. It buries itself deeper, and from that darkness, it begins to grow. That buried part becomes what he termed the shadow. The shadow isn't evil, it's merely rejected. It's made up of every feeling you weren't allowed to have, every impulse you thought made you bad, every truth you swallowed to be liked, every dream you dismissed because it wasn't practical. And the longer you resist it, the more power it gathers. This is why after ego death so many feel inexplicably tired. Not because they're lazy, but because their energy is locked in a quiet civil war within. You may not be aware of it, but when you judge your current state, I shouldn't be tired, I should feel motivated, I shouldn't feel this lost, you are generating resistance. And resistance consumes more psychic energy than surrender ever will. Jung captured this truth in his famous phrase, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." This was not poetic flourish, it was psychological law. That which you disown gains momentum in the unconscious. It controls you not from the light of awareness, but from the shadows of repression. But what if just for a moment you stopped resisting? What if instead of fighting your tiredness, you let yourself feel it without judgment? What if you said, "I'm not going to try to change this right now. I'm going to feel it fully and see what's beneath it." This is not passivity. This is integration, because underneath the exhaustion is often a deeper truth. Perhaps you're tired not just because you need rest, but because you've been living out of alignment. Maybe your soul is weary of performing. Maybe your spirit is trying to protect you from returning to a life that no longer fits. And here's the paradox. When you allow a feeling to exist, it begins to move. Emotions, after all, are energy in motion. They are meant to be felt, processed, and released, not suppressed and stored. Let's make this real. Imagine you wake up and feel sluggish. The old version of you would have powered through, grabbed coffee, pushed the to-do list, shamed the fatigue. But you've already seen that this no longer works. Now, you take a breath. You place a hand over your heart and whisper, "This too belongs." You let the tiredness speak. You ask, "What are you trying to tell me?" And suddenly, something shifts. You feel a slight loosening in your chest. The inner tension softens. A new sensation stirs, maybe not a jolt of energy, but a whisper, a curiosity, a gentle nudge to stretch, to open a journal, to step outside. That's not forced motivation. That's organic momentum, the kind that arises when the psyche is no longer at war with itself. This is the beginning of realignment. Jung would say you've begun to harmonize with your inner world. You've stopped chasing goals that were never truly yours and started listening for signals from the self. And the self doesn't motivate with pressure. It moves through resonance, through what feels authentic, what carries subtle meaning, what awakens your curiosity even before your energy returns. And here's where many people miss the beauty of this phase. They wait for drive, but the self sends invitation. A dream that lingers, a phrase that repeats in your mind, a strange desire to draw or cook or rearrange your desk. These may seem trivial, but they're not. They're breadcrumbs, signs, psychological signals that your soul is starting to speak again. Jung called this process the transcendent function, the mysterious alchemy that arises when conscious awareness meets the unconscious shadow. It's what happens when you stop denying your inner life and begin to dialogue with it. It is not linear, it is not loud, but it is real. So the next time you feel stuck, don't reach for discipline first. Reach for curiosity. Instead of asking, "How do I force myself to get going?" ask, "What part of me needs to be heard?" And if the answer comes in a whisper, trust it. If it comes as a poem, write it. If it comes as rest, honor it. Because this sacred listening is the foundation of real momentum. Not the frantic kind that burns out after a week, but the slow, soulful kind that builds a life in harmony with your truth. You're not lazy. You're recalibrating. You're not broken. You're becoming whole. The stillness you feel is not a stop sign, it's the space yourself has cleared to finally speak. And when you listen, really listen, that's when your life begins to move again. Not out of pressure, but out of alignment. By now, you've come to recognize that what you're experiencing is not a breakdown, but a breakthrough disguised in silence. The emptiness is not a void to be feared, it is a clearing, a sacred pause. And the resistance you once fought, it was never laziness. It was your soul protecting you from repeating what no longer serves. But now, something deeper begins to stir. And it doesn't come as a checklist or a thunderous epiphany. It comes as a flicker, a half-formed thought, a faint impulse, a strange curiosity. This is where the soul speaks through symbol, the native language of the unconscious. Carl Jung understood this terrain well. He taught that the psyche is not only logical, it is deeply symbolic. It does not merely process facts, it dreams, it dances, it tells stories, and it heals through expression. In this post-ego death phase, you may not yet know who you are becoming, but you can begin to express it. Not by trying to define yourself, but by allowing your creativity to become the bridge between what is unconscious and what is emerging. This is the invitation of the shadow not to destroy it, but to dance with it. Think of your negative states, your tiredness, your confusion, your sadness, not as blocks, but as portals. They are not meant to be eradicated, but explored. They contain the very fuel of transformation if only you stop judging them and start creating from them. Write a journal entry titled, "The Wisdom of My Confusion." Draw an image of your fear, give it a face, a shape, a texture. Compose a poem called "The Gift of Not Knowing." These aren't trivial exercises. They are rituals of reintegration. Each act of expression gives the shadow a voice, and when the shadow is heard, it no longer needs to control you from the dark. Jung believed that the shadow held not just our pain, but also our creative genius. He wrote, "The shadow is 90% gold, but we cannot mine this gold through logic alone. We must engage with it through metaphor, through myth, through paradox. Because the soul doesn't speak in spreadsheets. It speaks in story. And here's where things become interesting. Your mind loves a good paradox. It lights up when something doesn't fit cleanly, because in that tension lies transformation. So, if you're feeling lazy, don't resist it. Explore it. What if your laziness is sacred? What if it's the body's rebellion against years of unnatural pace? What if it's your inner artist begging for space? You could even write an essay called "The Productive Power of Doing Nothing," or sketch a character called "The Brave Coward," a person afraid of everything who still shows up anyway. These contradictions are not weaknesses. They are invitations. They force you to abandon the rigid binary thinking of the ego and embrace the nuanced reality of the self. You are not either strong or weak. You are both. You are not either clear or lost. You are always becoming. The more you can play with these paradoxes, the more alive you will feel, not because you've solved yourself, but because you've begun to experience yourself. And this is where creativity becomes more than art. It becomes alchemy. Alchemy, as Jung saw it, wasn't just a medieval attempt to turn lead into gold. It was the psychological metaphor for turning unconscious material, the lead of our denied feelings, into the gold of transformation. The alchemists didn't fix the lead. They heated it. watched it, witnessed it, transform through fire and time. Your emotions are no different. When you write from your sadness, when you draw from your fear, when you express what you don't yet understand, you are engaging in modern alchemy. You are allowing the unconscious to become conscious, not through willpower, but through witnessing. And the moment you stop fighting your feelings and start collaborating with them, you'll notice something subtle but profound. Your life begins to move again. Not with the frantic momentum of the ego, but with the sacred rhythm of the self. You get out of bed not because you must, but because you're curious where the day might take you. You sit down to write not because there's a deadline, but because something inside you wants to speak. You return to your relationships not to prove you're okay, but to connect more honestly. And this, my friend, is not just healing. It is rebirth, but not the flashy kind you see on social media. Not a glow-up, not a highlight reel. A quieter rebirth, one that happens when no one is watching. A return to your original rhythm, your organic truth, the voice you buried long ago because it didn't fit the image. That voice is rising now, not to shout, but to hum. And if you follow that hum, if you honor it with creativity, with curiosity, with compassion, you begin to embody your wholeness. You stop waiting for permission. You stop chasing clarity. You begin to trust the process. You begin to play. Because play is not childish. It is sacred. It is the language of the soul before shame got in the way. When you engage in playful creation, you become more receptive, more spontaneous, more human. And it's in this state, not in polished perfection, that the self feels safe enough to speak. So paint badly, write sloppily, dance awkwardly, start messy, laugh at the paradox, cry at the mystery. This is the way forward, not a straight line, but a spiral, not a plan, but a process, not control, but connection. You are not here to perform healing. You are here to live it. And when you live from that place, not even the shadows can stop your light. There is a moment often subtle, almost unnoticeable, when the chaos begins to still and you feel something shift within. You may not know what it means. You may not even recognize it at first. But deep inside, something is knocking. It doesn't come with a loud declaration or a neatly packaged plan. It arrives through dreams that linger, through symbols that repeat, through quiet nudges that make no logical sense but feel undeniably real. This is what Carl Jung called the voice of the self. Not the self as a role or a resume. Not the self you present on social media or to strangers at a dinner party. The self with a capital S, the totality of who you are. Your conscious mind, your unconscious shadow, your deeper wisdom, your capacity to grow, to love, to integrate all parts of yourself into one living truth. After ego death, when your old identity dissolves and the drive to be someone vanishes, the self begins to emerge not as a new mask, but as your most essential being. And its language is not linear. It does not shout instructions. It speaks in symbols, metaphors, dreams, impulses, synchronicities. And if you want to move forward, truly forward, you must learn to listen. In a culture obsessed with logic and results, we're taught to dismiss anything we can't measure or explain. But Jung challenged this thinking. He believed that the unconscious was not a chaotic mess, but a living intelligence, what he called the objective psyche, and that it was constantly offering guidance if only we would pay attention. So what does this look like? Maybe you've been waking with strange dreams, disjointed, poetic, or even unsettling. You brush them off, but they persist. A forest, a forgotten house, an animal that keeps appearing. Jung would tell you, don't ignore this. These are not meaningless fragments. They are the symbols your unconscious is using to communicate the next steps in your evolution. He wrote, "The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. That dream may hold more insight than any book or motivational talk, because it comes not from your conditioning, but from your core. Or maybe you've noticed a pattern. A certain phrase keeps appearing. You keep seeing a specific image. A memory keeps surfacing. A friend calls you out of nowhere with a message that speaks directly to what you've been wrestling with. These are what Jung called synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that the rational mind cannot explain, but the soul instantly recognizes. And here's the key. These subtle signals are not random. They are the self reaching out to you, inviting you into greater alignment. But here's the challenge. This kind of guidance doesn't operate on command. You can't schedule it into a planner or force it into a timeline. It flows when you stop grasping. It speaks when you stop shouting over it with your shoulds and your scripts. It requires that you slow down, become present, and trust your intuitive responses, not blindly, but reverently. Because the self will never manipulate you. It will never pressure you. It doesn't seduce with fear or urgency. It calls to you with resonance, with a sense of inner rightness. Not always pleasure, but often peace. Not always comfort, but always truth. This is what Jung meant by the transcendent function, a psychic mechanism that bridges the conscious and unconscious, allowing a third path to emerge. When you allow both your thinking mind and your intuitive depth to engage in dialogue, something new is born. Not a compromise, but a creative solution that neither side could reach alone. Here's an example. Let's say you're facing a decision, a career change, a relationship shift, a life pivot. Your logical mind wants clarity, a pro-con list, immediate answers. But your dreams start showing you water floods or a crumbling structure. You feel drawn to write about freedom, to paint wild landscapes, to listen to music that makes you cry. That's not distraction. That's information. The unconscious is speaking. If you integrate both the logic and the symbol, you may realize the job you're clinging to is safe, but soul-depleting. That your relationship feels secure, but stagnant. That your body is longing to move, to create, to become again. You don't need to abandon everything overnight, but you do need to listen, to track the threads, to trust that your inner guidance system is wiser than you've been taught to believe. And here's something even more beautiful. The more you honor these signals, the stronger they become. The self doesn't punish neglect, but it rewards attention. When you follow the dream, right from the impulse, take the small inspired step, you begin to align. You begin to feel like yourself again, not the mask, but the being beneath it. This is not about mysticism, it's about psychological integration. The modern world pushes you to seek answers outside of yourself, to Google your way through a crisis, to measure your worth in productivity, to doubt anything that can't be monetized or quantified. But Jung knew the real journey is inward, and the map is already within you. So ask yourself, what has been whispering to me lately? What symbols keep appearing in my life? What dreams am I being asked to remember? What decision am I avoiding because I want certainty instead of truth? And if you don't know the answers, good. That means you're listening. You are not lost. You are being called back to yourself, called toward your wholeness, called into the space where ego no longer dictates the story and where the self at last gets to speak. And when you let that voice guide you, you don't just find motivation. You find meaning. You don't just move forward. You evolve. There comes a moment, quiet but unmistakable, when something within you no longer seeks answers, but instead begins to listen. Not to the world's demands, not to your old identity, but to that soft, sacred voice rising from within. Carl Jung called this the movement toward individuation, the journey not toward perfection, but toward wholeness. And wholeness does not mean you have it all figured out. It means you are no longer at war with yourself. If you've walked with me through this video, then you've already begun that journey. You've looked into the mirror of ego death and chosen not to run. You've sat with silence and learned that it's not emptiness, but invitation. You've listened to your resistance not as a flaw to fix, but as a message to receive. And you've begun to honor the language of your soul through dreams, symbols, creativity, paradox, and presence. This is no small thing. In a world that celebrates speed performance and relentless achievement, choosing stillness, truth, and soul-aligned action is revolutionary. It means you are no longer chasing motivation from the outside, but allowing it to emerge from within. You are no longer trying to get back to the old version of yourself. You are walking forward toward the self. The self, as Jung defined it, is not an image. It is not a mask. It is the integrated totality of your psyche, your light and your shadow, your past and your potential, your wounds and your wisdom. And this self doesn't demand that you hustle harder. It asks only that you listen, respond, and allow it to guide your path not with force, but with resonance. This now is your work, not to chase the next goal, but to honor the moment you're in. To move not because you're behind, but because you're aligned. To create not to impress, but to express something real. And if you ever find yourself drifting again into old habits, into fear, into silence, that feels more like numbness than rest, return here. Not just to this video, but to the truths within it. The void is not your enemy. The resistance is not your weakness. The confusion is not your failure. These are signs you're becoming real. You are peeling away the noise, shedding the false, and stepping slowly, humbly into the life that only you can live. And as you walk this path, you don't have to do it alone. This space, this channel, is a place for people like you. Deep thinkers, soul searchers, those tired of the surface and ready to live from the center. Here we explore not just healing, but integration, not just growth, but depth, not just success, but meaning. If this message resonated with something deep inside you, if you felt seen or called, or even just curious again for the first time in a while, then subscribe. Not just to this channel, but to the process of becoming whole. Hit the bell icon so you won't miss the next step in this journey. There's more ahead, more truths to explore, more shadows to meet, more light to uncover. And I'd love to hear from you. What part of this message landed with you most deeply? Was it the silence, the shadow, the surrender? Share your reflection in the comments below. Your story might be the exact medicine someone else needs to hear today. Because the truth is, healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in reflection, in conversation, in community. Thank you for walking this far. Not everyone does, but you did. And that means you're ready not for the return of your old self, but for the emergence of the self you've always been becoming. Let's keep going together.